Hello, hello, hello. What's going on here then? Hi, welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is the show where every week I look at a book that was an influence to James Ellroy, a book that moved him, thrilled him, amused him. And this week's book is Gideon's Day by John Creasey. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about John Creasey, a little bit about the book Gideon's Day, and then I'm going to end by telling you a story about James Ellroy. Okay, so John Creasey is considered in many ways the father of the police procedural. And he was born in 1908 in Southfields, London. He's a real Londoner. He was born into a poor working class family. He was one of 9 children. And he had a pretty difficult childhood. He suffered from polio. And then he began working in a number of menial jobs as a clerk and in sales, and he harbored this burning ambition to become a writer. And he would write incredibly quickly. That was a penchant of his, in that he clocked up over 700 rejections before he published his first novel. But once he got started, there was no stopping him. And he wrote over 600 published novels using 28 pseudonyms. He created characters like the Baron, the Toff, Sexton Blake. All of these are essentially franchises. And and our character, George Gideon of the Yard, Gideon of Scotland Yard. Okay, so these books sold copies in their millions. This is the first book in the series, Gideon's Day, and it begins with Gideon calling in a junior colleague into his office. And the colleague's in a relatively good mood until Gideon gives him this real dressing down. He's like, I know you've been accepting bribes, and I cannot prove it, but until I can, you're suspended from duties. And obviously the guy's upset. He mouths off at him a little bit. But the thing with Gideon is he is remarkably honourable, and it's often said that he's admired by his police colleagues and villains alike. He plays fair. And these are, in a sense, police procedurals. And Creasy is often considered the father of the British police procedural. And they follow due process. Gideon is often frustrated by that process, but he's 100% honest. On the other hand, they are a little bit fanciful in that Gideon is such a throwback to, even at the time, I imagine, he was such a throwback to the stiff upper lip English gentleman, but with a slightly London harder edge, that his sense of honour comes across as probably just, either a touch unrealistic or just a touch too idealistic. And yet they're still hugely absorbing novels. So over the course of this day, Gideon has to follow through on this suspension. But it turns out that the policeman in question is killed in a suspicious hit and run. And the man's sister has links to a gangland boss that needs to be investigated. There is a child killer who needs to be hunted. An old woman is murdered in a sweet shop. There are mail van robberies that need to be solved. There is a jewel thief on the loose. And broadly speaking, all of these events come together over the course of a day. And, Gideon really kind of solves all of them. He gets on top of the entire situation. And it's really, really absorbing. Creasy wasn't admired by highbrow critics. Actually, very few prolific authors are, even say Joyce Carol Oates today. Until maybe the last year or so, she's not been taken that seriously by highbrow critics because people sniff at prolific authors. But, Creasy was just a fantastic writer. That's how he could write so fast and so well. It just came very naturally to him. And like Ed McBain, another author that James Ellroy admires. And because it's set over a day, you have almost a kind of like Robin Altman kind of Nashville. There's overlapping and interlocking stories that gives it a touch of realism as well. I would say this is an ethnically diverse London as it is today. Maybe not so much as it is today. Some of the attitudes have dated a little bit, I mean, there's an Italian guy who's like gangland. There's an Asian guy who's like a gangland chief. But bear in mind that Fu Manchu by Sex Roma was based on a London Limehouse gangster of Asian descent. But the books hold up really, really well, and Creasey went from poverty to being the most successful author in sales of his generation. Margaret Murphy has argued he was more successful than Ian Fleming in that regard, and perhaps more renowned. Gideon's Day was actually adapted into a film directed by John Ford and starring Jack Hawkins. Many of the other famous characters I mentioned were adapted for film and television. Creasey was honoured twice by the Mystery Writers of America as an Edgar Grandmaster, and it was that honour that inspired him to create the Crime Writers Association, who is still around today and still quite prominent in the UK as a kind of British equivalent. He was also heavily involved in politics. He was an early supporter of the Liberal Party and stood for Parliament for them. He didn't get in. The Liberals were very much a fringe party at the time. I mean, they kind of still are, but they're a bit more dominant now. He actually became disillusioned with the Liberals and began campaigning for he became an independent campaigning for all party cooperation, and he was awarded an MBE at the end of his life. He died a very rich man in Salisbury, Wiltshire, at the age, I think he was only in his early 60s, but he had produced a remarkable body of work over the course of his lifetime. So as for James Ellroy, I didn't actually know that he liked these books until a couple of years ago when he was touring in the UK, and he mentioned really devouring them as a child. And it might seem a little bit of an odd fit for Ellroy, Ellroy who writes about police corruption and his characters are not honourable in the least. They're the opposite of honourable, the dishonourable from everything from the profane language, which you don't hear in here, no profanities whatsoever, to the sleeping around, they're adulterous because the pressure of police life and all of this and the extreme violence. All of it the opposite of Gideon, who's a family man who detests violence. If violence is ever necessary for the job, it's in a fully honourable way. So I was quite surprised, and there's a famous story about James Ellroy. I'm sure many regular Ellroy readers and viewers of this show have heard it, which is that for his 11th birthday, his first birthday after his mother had been murdered, and Ellroy went to live with his father. Ellroy's father got him 2 books as a present because Ellroy was already developing into this really prolific reader, voracious reader, would consume books. One of the books was the complete Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle, and the other book was The Badge by Jack Webb. And Ellroy's father thought that really he thought, oh, you're going to love the Sherlock Holmes books. But according to Ellroy, he completely disregarded that advice, began reading The Badge first, and was absolutely hooked on it. The Badge was, I've covered it on this show, it was a published companion piece to Dragnet, the hugely successful television series about the LAPD by Jack Webb. And it was a procedural in itself. It showed you all the LAPD codes, the cop talk, the famous cases, even the unsolved cases, which was unusual for Webb because it was almost an LAPD propaganda mouthpiece. So the unsolved cases like the Black Dahlia case, which would become the most important case to Ellroy, and his most famous novel, his breakout novel, and he was obsessed with it. So that's the story. And Ellroy has often used it as kind of like a Genesis story that, two roads diverged and he took the path of the Badge. And that kind of forged him as the writer he is today. A few years ago, I was writing James Ellroy's biography, about which I'll say another thing in a moment. And I was going through all of the photos that exist of Ellroy that he donated at the James Ellroy Archive at the University of South Carolina. There are hundreds, probably thousands of photos. And I'm going through a few photos of him as a kid, taken by his parents. And I get to this photo of Ellroy. He's 11 years old. He's sat at the kitchen table. He's reading a book. He looks completely engrossed in this book. And guess what the book is? It's the complete stories of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. And I was kind of taken aback by it because the whole story that Ellroy had always spun was that he'd completely disregarded that book. It meant nothing to him, the language of it, nor a Sherlock Holmes fan. He completely disregarded it to read the badge. He was hooked. That set him in that direction. And it got me thinking that we are what we present to the world, the image we present to the world, particularly if you're an author, if you're any type of celebrity or prominent public figure, you are in one sense what you present to the world. But there's another side to you. And again, this is particularly for celebrities who are under the glare of the spotlight all of the time, where you know that you don't show to the world, that you want to keep private. And I think in many ways, maybe he's more relaxed about it now, but in many ways, Ellroy's kind of Anglophile, his love of John Creasey's books and Sherlock Holmes and Gideon's Day, his absolutely love of this series, even though it's a million miles away from what he's written. Maybe because it's a million miles away from what he's written, there's work and then there's play. That is a really interesting side of him to think about. Okay, so that's my recommendation for this week's episode, Gideon's Day by John Creasey. It's an absolutely fabulous book, and this was a reissue to celebrate the centenary of this particular edition was to celebrate the centenary of John Creasey's birth. I highly recommend it. Now, on to the biography I mentioned, Love Me, Fierce and Danger, The Life of James Ellroy. Recently, I got into a bit of a spat on social media with some trolls. I won't go into what the argument was about. It was silly. Anyway, in retaliation, they began leaving one-star reviews of this book on Amazon and Goodreads. Now, I don't mind a one-star review if it's by someone who's read the book. I just want honest reviews. 1 star, 3 stars, 5 stars, 2 stars. It makes no difference to me. But they tried to flood Amazon and Goodreads with one-star reviews. So I'm reaching out to Ellroy fans. If you've read this book, and I know many of you have, leave a review on Amazon and Goodreads, just so we get the algorithm back to where it's supposed to be. Just leave an honest review, that's all I'm saying. Just to tip the balance away from the dishonest reviews by the trolls. I know many of you already have, and I appreciate that. And if you haven't yet, go out and do that. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more great episodes, and I'll be back with another book next week. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.